A former slot floor manager just revealed something that casinos have been hiding for years, and according to this insider, the information you're about to hear could change the way you approach slot machines forever. We're talking about denomination switching, specifically when moving from dollar bets down to pennies, actually works in your favor, and when it's exactly what the casino wants you to do. Based on internal reports and testimony from multiple former casino employees, there are five specific scenarios where switching to pennies is the smart move, and three situations where you're walking straight into a trap that could cost you thousands of dollars. Former employees across three different casino properties confirmed they were trained to recognize these patterns, but were explicitly instructed never to share this knowledge with players. Here's what makes this information so valuable. Casinos absolutely don't want you knowing when denomination switching strategies actually work. Because according to former training materials, if players understood the context behind these decisions, the casino's hold percentage on slot machines would drop significantly. We're going to break down all 8 scenarios, and by the end of this video, you'll know exactly when to switch and when to stay put. Let's start with scenario number 1, the progressive reset window. A former slot technician who worked on the gaming floor for 7 years revealed what he calls the golden window that appears immediately after a major progressive jackpot hits. According to this insider, most players have no idea that the mathematics of progressive machines completely change the moment that jackpot meter resets to its base value. Here's what's happening behind the scenes that casinos don't advertise. When a progressive jackpot is building, a portion of every bet feeds that meter. Typically between 1 and 2% of each wager goes directly to the progressive pool. On dollar denomination, you're contributing significantly more to that progressive with every spin, which means the overall return to player percentage is actually higher when that jackpot is substantial. But the moment that jackpot hits and resets, that entire dynamic shifts. Documentation from former employees includes detailed notes about a player named Marcus, who spent 6 months tracking denomination switching strategies across multiple progressive machines. Marcus discovered something remarkable. According to internal data he documented, during the first 200 to 300 spins immediately following a major progressive reset, the mathematical advantage of playing higher denominations essentially disappears. The base game RTP remains constant across denominations, but without that progressive contribution, you're no longer getting the enhanced return that justified the higher bet amount. Here's the specific math that former employees say casinos would prefer you never figure out. Let's say you're playing a progressive machine at dollar denomination where the base RTP is 88%, but the progressive contribution adds another 4% when the jackpot is maxed out. That's a 92% overall return. The moment the jackpot hits and resets, you're back to just that base 88% RTP at dollar denomination. Meanwhile, the penny denomination version might offer 86 to 87% base RTP, which suddenly becomes a much smaller disadvantage. What Marcus realized, and what former slot technicians confirmed, is that during this reset window, you can drop to penny denomination and extend your playing time dramatically while only sacrificing 1 to 2% in theoretical return instead of the usual 4 to 6% difference. According to Marcus's documentation, he was able to extend his average session length by roughly 300% during these windows while his overall losses decreased by 40% compared to his previous strategy of staying at dollar denomination throughout. Former employees said they noticed players like Marcus on the floor recognized exactly what they were doing, but were instructed to remain silent about the effectiveness of the strategy because it reduced the casino's theoretical win per hour from these players significantly. Here's what happened when Marcus applied this knowledge consistently. Over a 6-month period documented in his records, he reported net positive results on progressive machines, something former employees say less than 8% of regular slot players achieve over any extended time frame. But if you think that's the only situation where switching to pennies actually works, wait until you hear about scenario number 2. And speaking of timing your denomination switches strategically, there's a second scenario that former casino employees say works consistently, but it requires understanding something about slot machine programming that most players never consider. Scenario number 2 involves what insiders call the bonus frequency sweet spot, and it applies to a specific category of machines that you've probably played dozens of times without realizing this advantage existed. Former floor supervisors from two separate casino properties reported noticing something interesting about players who understood bonus trigger frequencies across different denominations. According to their observations, certain machines, particularly games like Buffalo, Dancing Drums, and 88 Fortunes, have a mathematical quirk in their programming that creates an exploitable window for denomination switching. Here's the technical reality that former employees say is buried in programming documentation that regular players never see. On these bonus-heavy games, the frequency of bonus triggers remains remarkably consistent across denominations, but the hit frequency in the base game doesn't scale proportionally the way most people assume it does. Let's use Buffalo as a specific example because former game programmers who worked on similar titles confirmed this pattern exists across multiple manufacturers. According to programming specifications that former employees referenced, the free spins bonus on Buffalo triggers at roughly the same rate whether you're playing at dollar denomination or penny denomination, approximately once every 180 to 220 spins, based on the standard volatility setting. But here's what makes this significant. The base game hit frequency at dollar denomination might give you a winning combination every 6 to 8 spins, while at penny denomination, you might see winning combinations every 4 to 5 spins. This creates what former analysts called a compression effect, where you're hitting more frequently in the base game at lower denomination, which means your bankroll depletes more slowly while you're waiting for that bonus trigger that happens at essentially the same rate. Documentation from a former compliance supervisor includes detailed notes about a player named Jennifer, who spent 18 months developing a denomination switching strategy specifically for these bonus frequency machines. According to the records, Jennifer would start sessions at penny denomination on games like Buffalo and Dancing Drums, playing through to the first or second bonus trigger, then evaluate her position. If she hit a substantial bonus, anything over 100 times her bet, she would take those winnings and either leave or switch up to higher denomination for a set number of spins. If the bonuses were modest, she'd stay at penny denomination, using the consistent bonus frequency to generate small wins while minimizing base game losses. Former employees noted that Jennifer's strategy was remarkably effective because she understood something crucial. On these specific machines, you're essentially paying for the opportunity to hit bonuses, and at penny denomination, that cost per opportunity drops dramatically while the opportunity itself remains nearly constant. Here's what the math looks like according to internal data that former analysts compiled. At dollar denomination on Buffalo, you might invest $180 to $220 to reach that free spins trigger. At penny denomination on a 40-line bet at 1 cent per line, you're investing roughly $70 to $90 for the same trigger opportunity. The bonus itself pays proportionally to your bet, obviously, but Jennifer had calculated that the variance in bonus outcomes meant she'd rather take 3 or 4 shots at bonuses at penny denomination than one shot at dollar denomination with the same total investment. Former floor managers said they watched Jennifer build her bankroll from an initial $500 to over $2,000 using this exact approach over a 3-month period. And internal reports noted she was consistently achieving what they called positive deviation from theoretical hold percentages. But here's what makes this strategy only work in specific situations, and this is critical. It requires discipline that most players simply don't have. Before I reveal scenario number 3, which is probably the most controversial thing an ex-employee has ever told me about denomination switching, I'd really appreciate if you'd subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because the information I'm sharing could genuinely save you thousands of dollars. And let me know in the comments, have you ever switched denominations mid-session? What happened? Did you win or lose after making that switch? Because what I'm about to share goes against everything casinos tell you about how slots work. Scenario number 3 is something a former game programmer revealed, and it concerns what insiders call the volatility mismatch strategy. This programmer, who worked directly on pair sheets and volatility indexes for a major slot manufacturer, explained that denomination actually affects volatility differently than players think. According to technical documentation he referenced on certain machines, the volatility profile actually changes between denominations in ways that aren't proportional or predictable. Pair sheets, the internal documents that define every aspect of a slot machine's mathematics, are applied differently across denomination options, and on some games, particularly older Wheel of Fortune variants and certain IGT classics, the volatility curve is actually flatter at penny denominations than it is at dollar denominations. What this means in practical terms is profound. When you understand which machines have these flatter volatility curves at penny denominations, you can exploit a situation where you're getting more consistent returns with less dramatic swings. The former programmer specifically mentioned that this information could have saved a player named Robert thousands of dollars. But we'll get to Robert's story in just a moment. Now, before we get to Robert's devastating experience and scenarios 4 and 5, I need to tell you about the three situations where switching to pennies is exactly what the casino wants you to do, because these traps are costing regular players an absolute fortune. Here's where casinos actually profit from players switching down, and according to former compliance officers who monitored these patterns for years, what I'm about to reveal might be the most important information in this entire video. We're now looking at the three scenarios where denomination switching is exactly what the house wants you to do. And the first one involves something insiders call the RTP trap. A former compliance officer who spent 8 years monitoring slot floor performance told me something that should concern every single player who's ever switched from dollars to pennies, thinking they were being conservative. She said when players switched to pennies on certain machines, the casino's hold percentage increased dramatically, sometimes by as much as 40 to 50% compared to what they were holding at higher denominations. Here's the technical reality behind this trap. Return to player percentages are not consistent across all denominations on the same machine. According to internal reports that former employees referenced, many popular machines have RTP configurations that drop by 4 to 6 full percentage points when you move from dollar denomination down to penny denomination. Let me give you specific examples that former floor managers confirmed. According to their internal data, machines like certain versions of Quick Hit and some older IGT multi-line games have RTPs around 92% at dollar denomination, but drop to 86 or even 85% at penny denomination. That might not sound like a massive difference, but here's what it means for your actual money. Let's say you walk up to a machine with $500. At dollar denomination with 92% RTP, your theoretical loss over an extended session is $40 per $500 cycled through the machine. At penny denomination with 86% RTP, that theoretical loss jumps to $70 per $500 cycled through. But here's where the psychology becomes devastating. Most players feel like they're being safer and smarter by switching to pennies, so they play longer. They cycle that $500 through the machine multiple times because they feel protected by the lower denomination. Former analysts compiled data showing that players who switched to pennies on these RTP trap machines would typically cycle their bankroll 6 to 8 times during a session, compared to only 2 to 3 times at dollar denomination. When you run those numbers, the player at dollar denomination with 92% RTP cycling $500 3 times loses about $120 theoretically. The player who switched to pennies with 86% RTP cycling $500 7 times loses about $490 theoretically. A documented case from casino records shows a player who switched from dollar to penny denomination on one of these RTP trap machines. This person started their session at dollar denomination, lost $200 in about 20 minutes, then switched to pennies, thinking they'd make their remaining $300 last longer. According to the timestamps on the internal report, that player stayed at the machine for another 2 hours and 40 minutes at penny denomination. The casino recorded the entire session in their system, tracking every single spin. This player thought they were being smart and conservative by switching down. They believed the lower denomination would protect them and extend their playing time. Instead, they lost their entire remaining $300 plus accessed another $200 from an ATM before finally leaving. The casino's internal analysis noted this as a perfect example of what they call denomination migration profit, where the house actually makes more money because the player stays longer at worse odds while feeling safer. And if you think that's bad, here's another way casinos profit from denomination switching. That former slot directors say they absolutely love to see happening on their floors. Scenario number 5, the bonus value diminisher. This trap specifically targets machines where bonus values scale disproportionately across denominations. And according to former employees, games like Lightning Link and Dragon Link are perfect examples of this mathematical deception. A former slot director who managed operations at a major tribal casino revealed something disturbing. They loved when players switched to pennies on these hold and spin games because those players didn't understand the bonus math that's programmed into these machines. Here's the technical breakdown of how these bonuses calculate payouts. Some games use pure multipliers where your bonus win is strictly proportional to your bet. Others use fixed values where certain symbols pay set amounts regardless of denomination. Then there are hybrid systems that combine both approaches, and this is where the trap gets sophisticated. On Lightning Link and Dragon Link variations, the hold and spin feature uses a hybrid calculation system. According to programming documentation that former technicians referenced, when you trigger hold and spin at penny denomination, you're not just winning less because you bet less, you're winning at a disproportionately reduced rate compared to higher denominations. Internal data that former analysts compiled showed players at penny denomination on these machines averaging bonus wins worth 15 to 30 times their total bet. Meanwhile, players at dollar denomination were averaging bonus wins worth 80 to 150 times their total bet. Notice that's not a proportional relationship. If it were purely proportional, the multiplier would be the same regardless of denomination. But according to former employees, the programming creates a situation where higher denomination players get disproportionately better bonus outcomes. You might trigger bonuses at the same frequency across denominations, but the value ratio doesn't match the bet ratio, and that's what makes this trap so effective. Remember Robert I mentioned earlier, the player who could have saved thousands if he'd known about volatility profiles? Here's what happened to him, according to documentation that former floor supervisors kept. Robert was playing Lightning Link at dollar denomination and had worked his way up to about $1,200 from a starting bankroll of $500. Then he hit a cold streak, lost back down to $800, and made a decision that former employees said they see constantly. He switched to penny denomination thinking he'd protect his remaining profit and still have chances at those hold and spin bonuses. Over the next 90 minutes, Robert triggered the bonus feature 6 times at penny denomination. His total win from those 6 bonuses was about $240. According to the former employees who documented this session, if Robert had stayed at dollar denomination and triggered even half that many bonuses, his mathematical expectation would have been over $2,000 in bonus wins. Instead, by switching down at exactly the wrong time, he gave back his entire profit plus his original $500 bankroll. Former employees said they watched it happen and couldn't warn him because casino policy prohibited them from offering any gambling advice to players. Now here's the third situation where switching to pennies is exactly what casinos want. And this one is so psychologically manipulative that former employees said they felt guilty watching players fall for it repeatedly. But before we get there, you need to understand something about time on device that casinos track obsessively, because what I'm about to reveal about scenario number 6 involves casino analytics that most players have no idea even exist. Casinos discovered something remarkable about players who switched to pennies. And according to former casino analysts who monitored these patterns for years, what they found led to the development of tracking systems that most players have absolutely no idea exist. Former employees from multiple properties confirmed they had metrics that tracked denomination switching patterns and what happened next. And the data they collected revealed something that should terrify anyone who's ever thought switching to pennies would protect their bankroll. Here's what the internal report showed. Players who switched from higher denominations down to pennies would stay at machines 3 to 5 times longer than players who maintained their original betting level. A former casino analyst who worked directly with player tracking systems explained that even with lower bets, extended playtime meant significantly higher total loss. And the casino's theoretical win actually increased in most cases when players made this switch. According to internal calculations that former employees referenced, a player betting $1 per spin for 30 minutes had a lower total theoretical loss than the same player switching to 1 cent per spin and playing for 2 hours, even though the per spin risk dropped by 99%. This is scenario number 6, and former employees call it the time trap. Here's the mathematics that makes this work so devastatingly well for casinos. When you're playing at dollar denomination, let's say on a machine with 90% RTP, and you're spinning once every 6 seconds, you're cycling about $600 per hour through the machine. Your theoretical loss is $60 per hour. Most players don't have the bankroll or the stomach to maintain that pace for extended periods. According to former floor managers, the average session length at dollar denomination is between 25 and 40 minutes before players either leave or switch denominations. But the moment you switch to pennies, something psychological happens that former analysts say is more powerful than any mathematical advantage you think you're gaining. The lower denomination creates what former employees describe as a false sense of safety. You see your credits climbing higher. $100 suddenly becomes 10,000 credits on the screen. You're hitting winning combinations more frequently because you're playing more lines, or the hit frequency is designed to feel more rewarding at lower denominations. Former game programmers confirmed that some machines are specifically programmed to provide more frequent small wins at penny denominations to create exactly this psychological comfort. And here's what happens next. According to documentation that former casino analysts compiled, players settle in, they order drinks, they get comfortable. According to internal metrics, the average session length for players who switched to penny denomination was between 2 and 4 hours, and some players would stay for entire shifts, 6 to 8 hours, cycling tens of thousands of credits through machines while convincing themselves they were being safe and conservative. But there's something even more insidious happening. Something former employees say they felt uncomfortable watching repeatedly. At penny denomination, you're experiencing what's called losses disguised as wins at an amplified rate. You bet 40 cents across 40 lines, you hit a winning combination that pays 30 cents, the machine celebrates with sounds and lights, and your credit balance drops by 10 cents. Your brain registers the celebration as a win, but you actually lost money. According to former analysts, this effect is dramatically more pronounced at penny denominations because the bet is split across so many lines. You're getting these false positive reinforcements constantly, which keeps you playing, which keeps you in that seat, which keeps you cycling money through a machine with a built-in mathematical edge against you. Documentation includes detailed notes about a woman named Patricia, who exemplifies exactly how this trap works. Patricia walked into the casino on a Saturday afternoon with $500. She started playing Lightning Link at dollar denomination, 50 cents per spin on a 50-line configuration. According to the timestamps in the casino system, she played for 38 minutes and lost $200. Former employees said what happened next was textbook time trap behavior. Patricia switched to penny denomination, thinking she'd make her remaining $300 last longer and still have shots at the hold and spin feature she was chasing. The casino's tracking system recorded that she stayed at that machine for 4 additional hours and 12 minutes. During that time, she triggered the bonus feature 9 times. The combined total of those 9 bonuses at penny denomination was $187. She felt like she was getting action, hitting bonuses, staying in the game. But the base game losses during those 4 hours consumed her entire remaining $300. Plus, she made 2 ATM withdrawals totaling $350 more. Former employees who documented this session said Patricia told a slot attendant afterward that she thought switching to pennies would protect her and give her more opportunities to hit that big bonus that would get her even. The slot attendant, according to internal notes, just nodded sympathetically while knowing the entire session was captured in the casino's analytics system as a perfect example of profitable denomination migration. Former floor supervisors confirmed they had a specific term for this pattern internally. They called it the slow bleed strategy. Players didn't realize what was happening until it was too late, because the lower denomination created an illusion of safety, while the extended time on device generated more total theoretical loss than if they'd simply maintained their original betting level or walked away entirely. Casino executives, according to former employees, actually preferred this outcome on certain machine types because it kept seats filled, it kept players engaged, and it generated predictable, steady revenue without the volatility of high denomination play. Now, I've shown you three scenarios where switching to pennies works and three where it backfires catastrophically. But here's what former employees say is the real secret that casinos guard obsessively. The final two scenarios aren't about the machines at all. They're about the specific situations you're in when you make the switch. Former pit managers reveal there's one specific bankroll situation where switching to pennies is absolutely the right move, and one situation where switching is the worst possible decision you could make. These are the two pieces of information that could make the difference between walking away with profit or losing everything. What former employees are saying about scenario number 8 is going to shock you because it involves a story about a player who made a single denomination switch decision that cost him $15,000. But first, let me explain scenario number 7, because this is actually the one time former employees said they wish they could tell players to switch, but corporate policy prevented them from giving this advice to anyone who wasn't already a high value rated player in their database. Former casino hosts reveal the one situation where switching to pennies is mathematically correct, and according to internal documentation, this is the scenario where the house edge actually diminishes when you move to lower denominations. But this only works under one very specific condition that most players never achieve: when you've already won significantly above your starting bankroll. Former host testimony from a property in Nevada includes this revealing statement. We would see smart players who understood this principle, and honestly, we respected them because they'd figured out something that most people never grasp about bankroll management on slot machines. Here's scenario number 7, the bankroll preservation mode. And this is the profit protection scenario that former employees say works every single time if executed with discipline. If you've already won significantly above your starting bankroll, let's say you started with $500 and you hit a substantial bonus that brings you to $2,000. This is the one situation where denomination switching becomes a mathematically sound strategy, according to former casino analysts who ran these simulations repeatedly. The strategy is straightforward. Switch to pennies after substantial wins to extend entertainment value while protecting the profit you've already secured. Let's break down the specific math that former analysts would calculate for high-value players who asked about this approach, even though they couldn't share it openly with regular customers. Let's say you start with $500 and you hit a lightning link bonus that brings you to $2,000. You've got $1,500 in profit sitting there. According to former analysts, if you continue playing at dollar denomination, you're cycling roughly $600 to $800 per hour through the machine. And with a typical 90 to 92% RTP, you're exposing $600 to $900 of your profit to risk in that time frame. But if you switch to penny denomination after securing that win, former employees calculated that a player with $1,500 in profit who switches to pennies can typically play 3 to 4 hours while risking only $200 to $300 of profit. The entertainment value extends dramatically while the risk to your winnings compresses significantly. Compare this to continued dollar play, where that same player staying at dollar denomination would likely risk $600 to $900 of profit in the same time frame. And the mathematics clearly favor the denomination switch in this specific context. A documented case from employee notes tells about a player named Michael who understood this principle perfectly. According to the records, Michael hit a $3,500 win on Lightning Link at dollar denomination. The casino's tracking system recorded that he immediately switched to penny denomination after that hit, played for 6 more hours, triggering smaller bonuses and maintaining action, and left the property that night with $3,100 in profit. The floor manager who shared this documentation said Michael was one of the smartest players he'd ever seen, because Michael understood the goal had shifted from profit generation to entertainment extension. You're playing with house money at that point, and the objective changes from trying to win to trying to maintain as much of your profit as possible while still enjoying the experience. Time value calculation becomes critical here. According to former analysts, a player with $1,500 profit who switches to pennies can typically play 3 to 4 hours while giving back only $200 to $300 theoretically, compared to potentially giving back $600 to $900 playing at higher denominations for the same duration. But here's the key distinction that former employees emphasized repeatedly. This only works if you have the discipline to leave when you've given back a predetermined amount. Michael had set a stop loss of $400 from his peak. The moment his profit dropped from $3,500 to $3,100, he cashed out and left, according to the documentation. Former hosts said players like Michael were rare because most people lack that discipline. But here's where most players mess this up, and it's a psychological trap that former employees said they witnessed constantly. Players think they're in scenario number 7 when they're actually in scenario number 8. They convince themselves they're protecting profit when they're actually chasing losses. They believe they've won enough to justify extended play when their actual win is modest and their decision-making is compromised. Which brings us to scenario number 8, and the story about the player who lost $15,000 making a single denomination switch at exactly the wrong moment. Former employees say this is the most heartbreaking pattern they witnessed during their careers, and multiple floor supervisors from different properties confirmed they saw this exact sequence of events play out dozens of times every single month. This is the desperation denomination switch, and according to internal observations, this pattern is so common and so devastating that it represents one of the casino's most reliable profit centers from regular slot players. When a player is losing heavily at high denomination and switches to pennies to chase losses with remaining bankroll, former employees say they could spot this pattern immediately, and they knew exactly what was about to happen next. A former floor supervisor who worked the graveyard shift for 6 years described it this way: "We could spot this pattern immediately, and we knew what was about to happen." The player's body language changed. They'd been playing aggressively at dollars or quarters, they'd lost significantly, and then they'd switch to pennies with this look of determination, like they'd figured out a way to get back in the game. We knew they were in trouble. The psychology behind this decision is what makes it so catastrophic, according to former employees. The player believes switching to pennies will extend their bankroll and give them more chances to win it back. But according to former analysts, this almost never works because multiple destructive factors combine simultaneously. Here's why this is catastrophic from a mathematical standpoint that former employees explained. A player who's down $2,000 at dollar denomination switches to pennies with $500 remaining in their bankroll. The technical explanation involves tilt, poor decision-making, the time trap we discussed earlier, and RTP disadvantage, all combining into what former employees called a perfect storm of loss acceleration. That $500 at pennies with extended playtime and emotional decision-making typically lasts 90 minutes before complete loss, according to casino tracking data. The same $500 at dollar denomination, while stuck, would typically last 15 to 20 minutes, limiting total damage to just that $500 loss. But here's what makes this worse, according to former floor managers. Players often access more money during these extended penny denomination sessions. Former employees noted that players who switched denominations in this desperate scenario typically made multiple ATM visits, and the pattern was so reliable that some properties would position ATMs strategically near high-traffic slot areas. The player I mentioned earlier, named David, exemplifies everything that can go wrong with desperation switching. According to documentation that a former slot attendant provided, David started with $1,000 at dollar denomination on a busy Saturday night. He lost it within an hour. Then he switched to pennies with $500, telling the attendant he just needed to catch one good bonus to get even. The casino's system tracked that he played for 4 hours at penny denomination. During that time, he made 3 ATM visits totaling $2,500. Then he hit his credit cards for $4,000. At that point, according to the attendant's notes, David switched back to dollar denomination with his final $3,000. Attempting to win back his losses with what he called one last aggressive run, he lost everything. The slot attendant who witnessed this said David kept repeating the same phrase throughout the night. I just need one good bonus. Former employees revealed this pattern was so common and so devastating, they wished there was a way to intervene, but casino policy prevented them from offering gambling advice, and the legal department had made it explicitly clear that employees could not suggest customers stop playing or modify their betting patterns. Multiple former employees said watching these, desperation switches was the worst part of their job because they could see exactly how it would end. They understood the mathematics working against the player, but they were powerless to say anything that might help. So now you know all 8 scenarios. 5 where former employees confirm switching to pennies can work, and 3 where it's exactly what the casino wants you to do. Let's break down the pattern that emerges from these insider revelations. Because according to multiple former casino employees, understanding this pattern is worth more than any single tip or strategy they could have shared during their careers. When you look at scenarios 1, 2, 3, 5, and 7 together, here's what former employees say is the common thread that connects them. Switching works when you're strategic, informed, and disciplined. The progressive reset window works because you understand timing and mathematical advantage. The bonus frequency sweet spot works because you understand programming and probability. The volatility mismatch strategy works because you understand par sheets and risk profiles. The bankroll preservation mode works because you understand profit protection and entertainment value. But scenarios 4, 6, and 8 reveal the dark side of denomination switching, and the common thread there is equally clear according to former analysts: emotional decisions, lack of information, and desperation. The RTP trap catches players who don't understand return percentages across denominations. The time trap catches players who don't understand theoretical loss over extended sessions. The desperation switch catches players who've already lost control of their decision-making process. Former employees said the casino's advantage isn't just in the math. It's in players not knowing when each scenario applies to their specific situation. The information asymmetry is what creates the edge, according to 3 different former compliance officers who used almost the exact same phrase. If players understood context, the casino hold would drop significantly on slots. But here's something even more important that former employees revealed about how casinos actually train their staff to exploit these patterns. Casino employees are trained to recognize denomination switching patterns, but the training they receive is specifically designed to identify profitable patterns versus player advantage patterns. According to former training materials that one supervisor retained after leaving the industry, employees learn to identify what management calls profitable switching patterns versus player advantage switching patterns. The distinction is crucial because it reveals how selectively casinos apply their customer service principles. Former hosts revealed that when high-value players showed signs of smart switching, like scenario 7 where they're protecting profit, they were offered comps and incentives to keep playing. The casino would send offers for food, hotel rooms, show tickets, anything to extend that player's time on property, even though their denomination switch had reduced theoretical win per hour. But when players exhibited desperation switching, scenario 8, employees were instructed to remain passive and let the session continue without intervention. Former employees said this felt manipulative, especially with elderly players who would spend hours cycling through their Social Security checks at penny denominations after losing heavily at higher denominations. One former floor manager said it plainly: "We could see the desperation switch happening. We knew how it would end, but we were told customer choice was paramount." The policy justification from casino management was always that they couldn't give gambling advice and that players had the right to make their own decisions. But former employees say it's really about protecting profit, and the selective care reveals the truth. High-value players get customer service that discourages bad decisions, but average players don't receive that same protective attention. So based on what these former employees revealed, here's how to think about denomination switching before you make that decision at the casino. ask yourself 3 questions. And according to former hosts who counseled high value players privately, these are the exact questions that separate winners from losers over time. Question 1: am I switching from a position of profit or loss? If you're switching because you've already lost significantly and you're trying to extend your remaining bankroll, you're in scenario 8 territory. And former employees say that almost never ends well. Question 2: do I know the specific RTP difference between denominations on this machine? If you don't know whether you're walking into an RTP trap like scenario 4, you're gambling with more than just the normal house edge. Question 3: am I switching to extend entertainment or to chase losses? Be brutally honest with yourself about this, because former employees say the players who succeeded were the ones who could answer this question truthfully. Former hosts said players like Michael and Jennifer, who understood these principles, were honest with themselves about their motivations and their situations. But if you're even slightly uncertain about whether you're in a profit protection scenario or a desperation scenario, former employees say the safest move is to cash out and walk away entirely. The red flag that former floor supervisors learned to recognize was players who would hesitate at the cage window, clutching their ticket, asking if they should go back for one more session. That hesitation, according to former employees, was the clearest indicator that the person should leave the property immediately, but casino policy prevented them from ever saying so directly. Multiple former employees said if they could go back and break policy just once, they'd tell every player who exhibited that hesitation the same thing. The fact that you're unsure means you should leave right now, and nothing good comes from going back to those machines when you're in that mental state. This is information that casinos spent decades trying to keep from reaching regular players. And according to every former employee who contributed to this video, understanding these 8 scenarios and knowing which one applies to your specific situation is worth more than any strategy card or system you'll ever find. The mathematics never change, but context changes everything. And that's what former employees say players need to understand above everything else about denomination switching on slot machines.